Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers here to talk Seahawks football. We're going to talk about the NFC West teams today, get you all updated on what the other teams in our division have been doing in the offseason to either get better or get worse or change or whatever, see how we stack up. And first off, I think we're going to talk about some free agent type visits, some recent signings, some official 30 prospect visits to the VMAC and some other prospects and so forth. So a lot to talk about. Welcome in, Keith. How you doing?
Doing good. Yeah, lots to talk about today. Where do you want to start?
Well, I thought I'd just kind of start with a couple of signings, couple of visits and so forth, and just kind of get a gauge as to where we're at with the roster. Mostly finished at this point, heading into just now 2 weeks away from the draft. Seahawks signed Laviska Shenault, wide receiver, punt returner, will compete there for the 4-5 spot on the roster, I think. And I kind of like that signing. We talked about that in our last show. After we finished recording, they signed offensive tackle Max Percher, previously with, I think, the Rams practice squad and a couple other practice squads and so forth. Definitely not a starter guy, mostly just kind of a swing guy, a guy to essentially draft hedge and compete for, backup rotation type stuff. So, any thoughts on that?
I mean, at this point, you're signing draft hedges and guys that may not make the roster, probably won't make the roster. So I'm not, I don't have a lot to say about it. I do like the idea that they're, filling in on the offensive line because they still need bodies.
Yeah. Well, they brought in 3 other guys too. They just didn't end up signing them. Ike Boetker, Lucas Patrick, and Greg Van Roten. They had interest previously in Cody Whitehair and Laken Tomlinson. Didn't sign those guys. So they did sign the Max Percher, but really kind of an underwhelming group anyway. I think, at this point, it would shock me if they signed somebody else. I think that they're just kind of setting up potential, hey, we missed it in the draft. Let's bring in a guy to training camp anyway.
Yeah, and it sounded like the Whitehair and Tomlinson ones were guys that were asking for more than, veteran minimum stuff. And they were like, that's not what we were thinking. So that didn't go very far. Not at this point anyway.
We'll see what happens after the draft.
Yep.
I mean, if they swing and miss in the draft, and and they could, you get into a situation where you're either stick and pick at 16, and then we don't pick again until 81. If you need to extend serious draft capital to move from 81 to 60 or something like that, maybe they miss out on their targets, and then you end up drafting in the 3rd round, 4th round for guards, and there's no guarantee that those guys are going to be ready to play week 1 in the NFL. And so if you miss out, Seattle doesn't have a lot of draft capital to expend, and it doesn't. We have 2 picks in the first 100, and those picks, man, I hope one at least is a defensive tackle or defensive lineman in some aspect, and that only leaves 1 spot to pick another position. And I don't know, they don't seem to have any urgency about the spot. I would imagine if they don't solve it in the draft, which is possible, they still have all off season up until week 1 to basically solve that issue, including trades and so forth. So,
interestingly, when you mentioned the top 30 visits pre-draft, 1 offensive lineman on that list, at least the list that I have.
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple. So Travis Glover from Georgia State at tackle, and then they just had Matt Gonclaves, tackle from Pittsburgh, is going to be switching to guard. he was in for a visit, fifth year senior, 6'6", 317 pounds, 33 and a quarter inch arms, which kind of dictates the move inside. He does have an 81 and a quarter inch wingspan. He's also almost, he'll be 24 in the 2024 season. He's 23, almost 23 and a half now. So that's it. They've had some other visits, Keith. If you go look at the broader list, when you take a look, you go beyond the VMAC visits so far, and they've had Shrine Bowl pro days.
They've visited with a lot there.
Combines. They visited with a lot of folks.
But it's just the top 30 visits where there's not a lot. That I just found that interesting, because there's on the list that I have, which apparently is not up to date, there's as many tight ends as there are offensive line.
What I found,
if
you go back and you look at the history of who they've talked to, and at the combines and the pro days and the virtuals and then the VMAC visits, there's not a lot of crossover. I would say like 10 to 20% of prospects that they visit with at the VMAC, also they have interest and interviews with at their pro days or combines and so forth. It seems like they kind of spread those things out a little bit to try to cover as many bases as possible. Mm-hmm. And there is some double meetings, but overall, you take a look at it, it's pretty, spread out and not a lot of crossover. So most of these guys that they're bringing in, they have not yet met with, which I found kind of interesting. One of the most interesting, and we were going to go over this list. I thought I'd go over the list anyway, right after we just talked about the free agent stuff. But as far as the 30 visits is concerned, I thought I'd just go through the list and stop me when you hear an interesting name. Trice Knight, linebacker, Malaki Corley, the wide receiver, the quarterback from UCF, John Reese Plumlee, Grayson Murphy, the edge out of UCLA, Nathaniel Watson, linebacker, Christian Boyd, defensive tackle, Northern Iowa. That interests me. Theo Johnson, we talked about quite a bit on our mock stuff. Tight end out of Penn State. Byron Murphy, defensive tackle, Texas.
That's a either 16
or stick and pick,
or
slight
maybe
drop.
Trade back a little bit.
Yeah, he's probably top 20. Yeah. Chop Robinson, the edge out of Penn State. That excites me.
Top 20, top 22, somewhere in that range.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Both those names kind of for sure keyed in on me. Travis Glover. Go ahead.
And I would put Jared Verse in there.
Jared Verse had a visit as well. Yeah.
All of those, like those three.
Devondre Sweat.
Are guys for the 16 or thereby.
Yes.
Devondre Sweat's probably more second round, especially after his recent
potentially
DUI arrest. So
Dane Bugler recently had him graded as a 4th round pick. So I don't know if he's going to go there, but that's where he's graded at. Bo Nix is on the list. I found that interesting. When you take a look at all of the visits, the combines, the senior bowls, the virtuals, and so forth, we've got all the quarterbacks covered. I mean, really, it goes like 7, 8 deep at the quarterback position. We've interviewed all of them and had them in the VMAC. So, but
they've never met with Penix.
That we know.
Penix said, actually, because it doesn't count as a top 30 visit, so they don't have to report it because he's a local.
So our offensive coordinator has his texts him every night, probably.
Yeah,
I mean,
I know.
You know what I mean? It's like they've got that relationship. So,
and he's local, so there's no rules around it. So you're right. I was thinking, because I know that at one point, Penix was like, "Yeah, I'd love to play for them, but they haven't talked to me yet." And they'd already talked to Bo Nix, and then they brought Bo Nix in again.
Believe me, they've talked to him.
Yeah. I just find it funny. I just think it's funny.
I do too. I do too.
Of all the quarterbacks, he's the one guy you don't have to talk to because Grubb knows.
There's a lot of talk.
They worked together the last couple of years. So
between McCarthy going 4 overall and Drake May dropping back a little bit, and Bo Nix moving up, and then Penix moving up, but then Bo Nix moving back and almost disappearing out of conversation at all. it's just gamesmanship. Like all of these slots where these quarterbacks are going to go are pretty much determined, unless you get teams moving up for whatever reason, trading in. These guys. So I'm not sure what to make of like Bo Nix and Penix. Originally coming into the draft process, they've got second round grades. Is that still true? Like after the pro day, after Penix kind of knocked it out of the park and the interview process and all that stuff, do those guys actually move up really on a lot of different draft boards, like uniformly? Or are we just talking selective teams have these guys graded?
That's the thing, is selective teams, because it comes down with Penix. If you're just looking at his tape, he's a top 5 pick. If you're looking at his injury history and the fact that he's a little older, you're saying maybe 3rd or 4th round. Put the two together, and that's why most people settled on 2nd round. But it comes down to the team. If the team is just absolutely like, we don't want to deal with the injury stuff, they'll move him down. And if people are like, we don't care about that, he's a freaking gamer, then he'll be higher.
And he hasn't really been injured in 2 years.
Yeah. Which he said that's part of the reason why he came back for this last year, was to show that he,
Yes.
2 full seasons, no injuries. So he's past
big
that.
Gamble on yourself for sure.
I mean, I think
it's 2 ACLs on his right knee, in 2018 and 2020, and then a shoulder clavicle ended with surgery in 2021, and then 22, 23 injury free. Other than nicks and cuts.
Clavicle is not something that you don't draft a guy over. I mean, that's like,
well, and he did miss some time with some sort of injury. I don't know I can't remember which joint it was, but obviously a shoulder. But his throwing shoulder missed a little bit of time in 2022, but not a lot. So, yeah. And then Trevondre Sweat. So here's this kid, and we haven't talked about this yet, but this kid made a mistake this last week. It's not a laughing matter, but it's just comical to me that a guy makes this sort of mistake in the biggest possible potential window of his life. Gets a DUI, and at like 3 in the 2:30 in the morning or whatever. And he's got kind of a history, a little bit, of being a little party animal and all that kind of stuff. Whatever, take that with a grain of salt. I don't have any direct evidence of that. I just, that's what you've read and so forth. So they had him in for a visit, though, kind of a pre-scheduled visit, but they went ahead and stuck to the visit and had him in. And Seattle was one of the first teams to kind of talk to him after this happened. So. Yeah. They either left with all the answers they were looking for, or they left with confirmation that they're going to strike him from their board. It'll be very interesting to see which way that goes. Now, we may never find out, but
well, yeah, because they may be like, okay, we're going to leave him where he's out on the board, but then they end up not drafting him because someone else picks him up before they could. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Right. So the other quarterback that I thought was really interesting, and I really kind of like this guy. I know you don't, which is fine. We'll find out in 5 years who's right, who's wrong. Spencer Rattler, quarterback out of South Carolina, was in for a 30 visit as well. So they're really doing their due diligence. Bo Nix was in, Spencer Rattler. They're looking at quarterbacks, though, that are going to be available in that 2nd round. I think Spencer's going to go earlier than projected. I think some people have him as a 3rd, 4th round guy. I think he's probably going in the 2nd round on us because of his physical capability. Now, he gets a lot of, and I don't know that I'm necessarily counting you in this camp, but he gets a lot of dissension based on his past behavior issues and so forth. So, for example,
I'm worried entirely about his tape, which is not good. And I know it's like, oh, he's so toolsy. He's only 6 foot. He's not like a 6 foot. He's not Drake May. He's not a big guy. He's not athletic. He was the worst athlete at the combine, other than I think a punter. And you go watch his tape, and yeah, he makes some great throws, and he also misses guys by 15 yards and makes some really, really dumb decisions with the football. I just don't see it. I know he's got a big arm.
I will agree with the dumb
really
decisions. I will agree with those things for sure. Are they correctable? Is there a team out there that feels like they can take the good and then refine the bad and make him more of a complete player? I'm not sure. I was going to say,
are you going to find a better quarterback, like guru, mentor, developer than Lincoln Riley, who gave up on him?
He didn't necessarily give up on him. Lincoln Riley never coached him. So Spencer Rattler left in the portal when Lincoln Riley came in, and he was going to have Caleb Williams. And so Spencer saw that, and things were kind of rocky there at school, anyway. And so he found his opportunity with a familiar coach as a quarterback coach or a offensive coordinator, I think something at South Carolina that he knew. But I was going to say Spencer. So he grew up here in Arizona, where I'm at, Phoenix. In fact, he went to the same high school that my son goes to. And so I'm kind of familiar with him a little bit in that respect, and his little backstory. Player of the year here, just a dynamic player, even from early age, like age 10 or whatever. He just dominated the Pee Wee football leagues, around here. In fact, he had his jersey retired from the league when he was a little kid here. But he's, I think that and he had some immaturity issues when he was here, and there was a national program, a Netflix show that came to the high school and filmed him, and made it into kind of a show, and he didn't show in the best light, during those things. And I think he got a little reputation. So that's part of it, I think, is the immaturity issues in the background story that he has. And that kind of translated a little bit to some of the on the field stuff. And then it made you wonder, especially that the last year at South Carolina, I think he had a better junior year. But the senior stuff, his offensive line fell apart. They had, 6 different starters along the offensive line during the year, and a lot of different combinations, and never really got settled back there. And so I'm not sure. This is one of those situations where you just really got to dig through all the stuff, all the layers and that's what the scouting department does. And they build these relationships, and they watch the tape, and they grind, and they brought him in, Keith. That's what I'm saying is they still brought him in for a 30 visit because they discount the bad and they're looking at the good.
Yeah. So I went back and just to make sure I wasn't remembering wrong, Lincoln Riley recruited Spencer Rattler to Oklahoma and was there for his entire career until they benched him and then brought in Caleb Williams. So, yeah, Lincoln Riley gave up on him.
Okay.
So
a young kid though, at the time, 20 years old, 21. It's just one of those things. People can change, people improve, people gain maturity, gain people skills, all that kind of stuff. I mean, to give up on a kid that early, I don't know. I can see that in college, but I think you have a chance to over time or have a little bit of redemption there.
Well, if you think that that it's because of the off-field, immaturity stuff that you were talking about, sure. But he got benched for his play on the field.
Yeah. Like I said, I think some of that stuff bleeds through. I mean, really, if you're immature as a human being, leading a team is not probably a strong suit for you, so, but that's just an interesting thing. It wouldn't shock me if we drafted him, but I would be disappointed. And the reason that I would be disappointed is where we would have to draft him. If it's the back end of the second round or the when you're talking about, pick number 60 or whatever, or if it's where we're at 81. The reason I would be disappointed if we drafted him at 81 is that we've already got 2 quarterbacks. It's like Geno Smith's on the roster for a year. He's going to start, and they just made a pretty decent commitment to Howell. who's essentially the same quarterback. And so
Well,
I
I mean, your Howell's bigger. He's got he doesn't have the bigger, as big of an arm, but he's got a more accurate arm. But he's a big guy.
Right. So it would shock me. It would disappoint me in the way that we would take another position group off the board if we drafted Spencer Rattler, and we'd have to carry 3 quarterbacks. I mean, you draft like quarterback in the 3rd round, he's making the roster.
Yeah, you're needing a you're in a position to draft a starter at another position, and you spend it on a 3rd string quarterback. Like that's not how you win football games. Now, if he drops to like the 6th round, okay, I can get behind that.
Yeah.
And that's about where
probably a practice squad guy, maybe.
That's where I would have him.
He's not viewed that way in the league. I'm telling you right now. I'm reading all sorts of things by people I respect. He's not viewed that way by draft media. But you listen to even like Mel Kiper, and he'll be like, you turn on some games and you're like, wow, this kid can play, and then you turn on the next game and you're like, this kid will never get drafted. And that's what Mel Kiper was saying about him. He's like, you can't trust him. So maybe Seattle's brought him in for a priority undrafted rookie free agent. Deal.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
He's going to get drafted, dude.
If he gets down in, he's going to get drafted. That's what I'm saying. If he gets down into the 6th round, you take him. Like that's a great place to take a flyer on a guy that has the physical tools. You just got to figure out if you can correct a little bit of his mechanics for his accuracy and make sure there's some working synapses in there between the ears, and you might end up with something. But skipping a starting linebacker that you desperately need to go take a 3rd string quarterback would be dumb.
Yeah. So a couple other players I wanted to mention really quick, and then we can move on. Cam Kitchens, the safety out of Miami, they bring him in. I like him physically, but he had poor athletic testing at the combine, which kind of threw me off a little bit based on his tape. Because I think they need to square that a little bit. Maybe that's why they brought him in. And then a kid that I wanted to mention to you, you probably haven't heard of him. Maybe you have. But after the show, I want you to research him for me a little bit and see. Seahawks are bringing in CFL cornerback Quantez Stiggers for a pre-draft visit. He was Rookie of the Year in the CFL last year with 5 interceptions, a whole bunch of pass defenses and knockdowns and so forth. Just kind of a dynamic guy. His backstory is pretty cool. Everyone should check him out. Quantez Stiggers.
Well, here's what I will say is that the last time John Snyder brought in a CFL guy, it was Brandon Browner.
Yeah. Well, and nobody else was sniffing around Brandon Browner from what I understand. Maybe one other team, I think. This guy's got like half the NFL after him. But he needs to get drafted. He has to go through the draft process. That's part of the rules. You just can't sign him, apparently. At this point, he's got to go through the draft. So, okay. We're talking about NFC West teams to find out kind of what they've done, where they stand before the draft. Arizona Cardinals, I really like their general manager, what they've done so far. Monte Austin Fort, head coach Jonathan Gannon. They added, record-wise, they were down last year, but they're a team that kind of bottomed out and are slowly ascending. And it started last year, kind of a roster rebuild from the get-go with the quarterback in place. Now, you can say what you want about Kyler Murray, but he is the quarterback. They don't necessarily have to move on. They've signed him. They've got him. If they let him go, it's going to be a huge cap hit. So, and they improved last year. He came in after that ACL, and when he came in, he was a difference maker. Joshua Dobbs started for them, and he came in, and it was just kind of night and day as far as the team. The team really rallied around him, and he grew a little bit, I think, with the injury and the rehab, and showing the team and the staff how hard he was going to work to get back onto the field. And I think I feel a little differently about him than I used to.
So you go through and you look at their list of guys, and they've got a bunch of guys that are still out there unsigned and may not be. but they've only lost like 5 guys in free agency that went to other teams, and they brought in a ton. They have just signed a lot of players, and that is a sign of a team that has a lot of cap room because they've been spent last year getting rid of some bad contracts.
Yep.
And so they are a rising team. This is a team that has the ability to come and move up, get better. And I think they're in good shape.
Agree. Yeah, I agree. They signed some interesting names. They signed Evan Brown, the old offensive center for us, Chris Moore, Jonah Williams, Sean Murphy Bunting, kind of an underrated cornerback in the league. I like him. Linebacker Mac Wilson, DJ Dallas signed with them to be their kind of punt returner and third back. Bilal Nichols, the defensive tackle, kind of an underrated guy. I would say they're, and then they've got the 4th pick. So let's go over the draft a little bit. So they've got the 4th pick in the draft and the 27, and then they've got the number 3 pick in the 2nd round, and the number 2 pick in the 3rd round. So they've got 4, 27, 35, 66. They've got 71 and 90. They've got 6 picks in the top 100. We've got 2. So they're really well positioned. I think they need, as far as needs go, they need a wide receiver. They need a linebacker. They could probably use an offensive tackle. I think they let DJ Humphreys go.
Yeah, but they went through and signed
Jonah Williams
to a
big contract.
A big contract. He's their left tackle. And so they see that as an upgrade. He's actually, pretty young. He's only 27. So I was a little surprised at that. In fact, I was going to be surprised at any team that spent a bunch of money on a free agent tackle this year, just because the draft is so deep with tackles. It's like,
agreed. They picked early. They have an early pick,
but they had the cap space to do it, and it's like, okay, we can do that, or it freed up pick 4 to go and get Marvin Harrison Jr.
I agree. That's going to be their pick.
I can't see it not being their pick.
They don't have any other needs that would justify the expenditure of, in a position outside of that. They would be better off dropping back if they weren't interested in him. Because
I'd be willing to bet they're going to drop back anyway.
That's possible.
Because someone's going to want to move up ahead of Minnesota to get whoever the 4th quarterback off the board is.
Yeah, and they need cornerback. Okay, so they had the 32nd ranked defensive back room, in the NFL last year.
That was bad.
They could, with their 27th pick, they could get best corner available, or they could drop back a little bit in the draft, from 4 to 9, for example, or 10, or somewhere in there, and draft or get one of the best corners in the draft there. So that's it for needs. They've got Connor at running back. They probably need another running back. They need a blocking tight end.
They need 3 wide receivers though.
Right. Yeah, and linebacker. Linebacker, they were ranked 32nd as well in that position group. So they could go linebacker too, but they've got such a lot, and they've got 103 as well. So they've got 7 draft picks in the top 103 picks. That's a lot of draft capital to move around wherever you need to go in the draft. I mean, these are lucrative picks too. You got 4, and then you got 27, 35, 66, 71, 90, 103. They're well positioned to pretty much get like 4 or 5 starters out of this draft, plus some really nice rotation pieces. And then they've got some back end stuff, 137, 161, 185, 226 to restock all of their depth too. So the Cardinals are interesting. If they play it right, they could end up in a couple of years being real competitive. They were starting to be competitive last year just from grit. Not a good roster, but now they're starting to build that roster in a couple of years. And when these draft picks mature, this team's going to be very competitive. So,
I think they're going to take a big step forward this year. Not enough to be a playoff team, but they're not going to be a 4-win team. They're going to be 7 this year. I think they take a big step forward. And
I think it's good that they had the same coaching staff come back. Obviously, I mean, when you win 4 games, but they had a commitment to Jonathan Gannon, and
they
that's
played
good.
really
It's
hard
good
for
to
him.
see that. Yeah, they did. Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look at the Rams. So the Rams, to me, last year, we looked at it. We were in preseason going, Seattle's going to win like 10, 11 games. We both predicted that. And we looked at the Rams roster. We were like, these guys are awful. They're going to be, if not in last place, they're going to be the 3rd worst team in the division, and they could be lucky to win 6, 7 games. And they go out and get into the playoffs. What's going on with the Rams this year?
Well, okay, so if we go back and look at last year, the differences between our prediction and where they ended up were the 2 victories over Seattle. Because if Seattle had won those games as you and I thought they would have been right where you and I predicted them.
I will say this: they after they beat us in the opener, they were bad. They lost like 3 in a row, 4 in a row, whatever. And I was like, we were right, and we're really bad because the worst team in the division just beat us. And then they got better. Like as the season went on, the second half of the season was really nice for them. And I'm just curious as to how you think that happened and what you perceive as being their off season so far.
Well, the biggest move on or off the roster this offseason was a retirement. And the best defensive tackle in the NFL is no longer on their roster.
Yay.
Much to the happiness of every interior lineman that plays for Seattle. But I mean, you're looking at a guy that you can't just replace. And so I think that's significant. But then you go look at, some of the stuff that they've done. Like, they went and spent money on Jonah Jackson and spent money to keep Kevin Dotson to help their offensive line.
Yeah. $48 million deal. Yeah.
Yeah. So they
signed Colby Parkinson.
Yeah. Which is weird, but it's still a thing. But they,
what do you bet that kid has like 48, 50 receptions for 600 yards and 7 TDs this year? That would piss me off like no end, but the kid's got the ability. I think he was totally underused in Seattle, so I'm kind of happy for him. I wish it wasn't a division rival, but I'm not too worried about him like being a difference maker, but I think he's going to be way better than he was in Seattle.
Yeah, he really, like last year was kind of a turning point for him. I know he didn't put up the huge numbers, but he seemed to be on the field more. He made some plays, made some significant plays, was getting better as a blocker, was no longer completely incompetent in that. Yeah, I mean, I think that he is a guy that is set to do better, and playing in this offense with that quarterback, he definitely could have a big year for them. I also think, I mean, he's still the second tight end on the roster and probably won't have a massive impact, but he was a good kid who worked hard. And so I agree. I wish it wasn't with a division rival, but Seattle wasn't going to pay him. Go get your money.
Yep. That's what he did. So in the draft, they've got the 19th pick overall. They need edge rusher, defensive tackle, obviously, running back, some base defensive end help. Those are kind of the big things I think that stand out for me. That they've got the 52nd overall pick, the 83rd, and the 98th as well. So 4 top 100 picks. That 98th pick is a special compensatory pick for losing coaches. And they've got an additional 4 compensatory picks, but they're all 3 6th-round picks and 1 7th-round pick. So that's what you get when you let free agents go and you don't sign anybody, which they did last year because they didn't
have any ability not to. Like they couldn't re-sign guys, and because they didn't have the cap room, and they couldn't sign other guys. They just had to let guys walk. That's part of the reason why you and I thought they were going to be lesser. And really, I mean, they weren't much better than you and I expected. They
That's
just
true.
beat Seattle twice.
That's true. So
And in one of those games, like Seattle had the lead the whole game, but couldn't move the ball in the second half because of their own stupidity, and ended up losing. What was it, 17-15? Um, it- in the first game, they ran all over Seattle, which you knew that the year was going to be bad for Seattle once that happened.
mhm.
But the other one, I mean, the Seahawks should have won that game. And that was just, to me, that was just like a mistakes in coaching up and down, that game. And it was just so frustrating. So we'll see.
So on the San Francisco 49ers, I wanted to talk about the losses really quick. And we've talked about the additions on the other team, but this list is quite something. So subtractions: defensive tackle Eric Alvstad, he was cut, signed with the Jaguars on a decent contract. Chase Young, who they traded for midseason, defensive end, was let go and not retained, not re-signed, signed with the Saints. Sam Darnold, Javon Kinlaw, defensive tackle. Charlie Warner, tight end. Sebastian Joseph Day, the defensive tackle. Clayton Farrell, the defensive tackle. Randy Gregory was let go. Ray McLeod, Isaiah Oliver, cornerback, linebacker Oren Burks, and Matt Pryor, offensive tackle. So that was their losses. And then, but you know what? They went out and spent some money this year too. Their additions: defensive tackle Malik Collins, defensive end Leonard Floyd, Yader Gross-Matos, defensive end Jordan Elliott, defensive tackles Devondre Campbell, linebacker Isaac Idiom, cornerback Josh Dobbs, the quarterback in free agency. I thought that was a good signing for them. Ezekiel Turner, the linebacker, and a couple other guys. So, to me, it's pretty impressive, how they continue to build this roster.
You look at last year and you go, okay, what was the strength of that team? It was their front seven, right? Because they had not just, this, where they weren't just loaded with starters. They had all the rotational guys too. I mean, you got Chase Young as a rotational guy. You had Randy Gregory as a rotational guy. Okay, 2 of your 3 linemen are gone. One of your middle linebackers is torn Achilles in the Super Bowl and won't be ready to play until mid-season at the earliest. And
Trent
you
Williams,
lost
their left tackle, is 36 years old in September.
Yeah, they also lost all of that depth that allowed them to do some of the things. I know that they did sign guys like Jordan Elliott, but I think that's a downgrade from Javon Kinlaw, and Malik Collins is a nice piece, but is he as good as Eric Armstead? I don't know.
Maybe.
Leonard Floyd would have been a great signing 2 years ago.
4 years ago. Yeah.
Now I think it's a good signing, but it's not a great signing. It's not.
Yeah.
I think I'd rather have. Yeah, I'd rather have Chase Young, in that group. So, I think as a group, this is a team that they're still going to be good.
They're still going to be great. And the reason they're going to be great is because all their starters are really good. They're, the depth, yes, will suffer, but, are they going to get to the same spot they were last year? I don't know. It's tough to win in the NFL and repeat kind of like that, but they've got a shot. I mean, they've got all their main players back. Now, after this year, it gets a little sketch. I mean, Trent Williams is 36, I mentioned. Wide receiver, Ayuk wants a new contract. Samuel and Juwan Jennings is back. But Jennings is unrestricted in 2025, and Samuel, gets injured a lot, so they're always going to be a little sketch, and depending upon injury. And I think this is one of those years, one of those teams where if injuries get them, they're going to be mediocre, average.
Yeah.
But if they go through with the clean slate, this team is going to go back and go deep into the playoffs.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I said, I think what made them great, not just good, but great, was that front seven on defense. Because they were just dominant. And I don't see the dominance. I mean, yeah, okay, they still have Bosa. That's awesome. They still have a couple other guys. But they don't have Kinlaw in the middle and Eric Armstead at the 5. They don't have Greenlaw at the middle linebacker until at least mid-season. Like they're missing a big chunk of what made them great in that front seven. So I think they're going to be a very good team. They're probably going to win this division. In fact, I think they win the division kind of easily like they did last year. But I don't see them as being this like instant Super Bowl team. Like you just put their name in pencil as the NFC's representative. I mean, anyone being completely honest, I think had that going into last year. You knew the 49ers were going to be there. The only question was their quarterback situation. And it turned out, guys were healthy, so it wasn't a thing. And once that was, taken care of, that team was not losing many games. It was just a loaded roster. And I think they're still a loaded roster, but they've come back a little bit. The gap has been, the gap is not as big as it was. And so I think they are more vulnerable. And you're right. There's the injury thing. And they've been very, very lucky when it comes to injuries.
They have.
Now you're looking
McCaffrey's a year older. He gets banged up. I mean, they ride him quite heavily. Yeah. It's interesting.
McCaffrey got hurt a lot earlier in his career. But he's been lucky to stay healthy with San Francisco. But at some point, running backs start to wear down, and he's got a lot of usage under him. So I expect that to happen soon. So we'll see.
As far as the draft goes, their first pick is 31st overall in the first round. Then they've got pick 63, 94, and then 124. And from there, it's just a bunch of comp picks for the most part. 132, 135, 176, 211, 215, 251. So they've got 10 picks, but only 3 of those are in the top 100.
Yeah, they traded away all of their native picks, but then they got comp picks because, well, they keep having guys go get signed elsewhere for big money. So
yeah, yep.
That's what happens when you have a roster that's that loaded. Eventually, you can't pay everyone.
So everyone knows where Seattle's at. We've covered that in nauseum this offseason. Now that you've kind of had a chance to look at some of the other teams, where do we stand? Where do these other teams stand heading into the 2024 season?
Well, I'd say San Francisco's still at the top. I think the Rams are still number 2. Seattle's 3, but Arizona's come up right behind them. Arizona is better. Seattle is different. We don't know if that's better or not. We know that it's on the road to getting better by getting rid of some really bad contracts and
getting positional.
Getting positional value under control where it needs to be. Yeah. I don't think the Rams are going to be bad. But if they make the playoffs, it'll be just like it was last year, where it was like, they're like the last team in, and that's it.
Same with Seattle. I think they're right. They're almost. I see them as equal.
Yeah, Seattle and the Rams are pretty similar. And they're both teams that just aren't there. I think the division San Francisco's, and I think Arizona makes up a big gap between them and Seattle. So basically you have San Francisco, who's come down a little bit, and the other 3 teams kind of grouped right in that just in or just out of the playoff level.
That's about how I see it. I agree. I think Seattle gets, Seattle's on the edge of being either really good or dicey because of the new coaching staff. We don't know what we're getting. We've got a new offensive coordinator. We've got a new defensive coordinator. We've got players that don't necessarily completely fit the scheme. Like Mike McDonald was asked, hey, are you going to play the same scheme you had in Baltimore? All that, everything that goes in with that. And he says, I don't know. I don't know what we're good at yet. I don't know if we've got the guys really to run my system, and that could take a couple of years. and he basically kind of admitted that. And when you take a
Well,
look at, go ahead.
I actually like that. I like him saying that, because one of the things that, the big thing with Ryan Grubb on the offense, and what I'm hearing is the same thing with McDonald on the defense, is don't try and fit a bunch of square pegs in round holes, right? Figure out what you have, what you're good at, and design what you do around your strengths.
Do they have enough time to do that without limping into the first week of the season?
Probably not.
Because that's really hard to do. I mean,
it is.
You know, who was saying the other day, one of the players was saying about the Geno Smith. He was talking about the lingo, the language, the play calls, the plays, the playbook. And he was like, it's like German. It's like learning German when you haven't learned German and you basically go take an immersion class, or you move to Germany and you're just thrown into it, and you got to learn it, or you're not going to make it. And that's what it's like right now. Everything's, black is red, red is black, one is two is one. It's like the whole thing is kind of new to everyone, not just the offense, but the defense as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the add to that is they're trying to fit. He's identifying players that he wants to play in certain situations and certain, play calls and so forth, and identify those players. And sometimes we have those guys on the roster, and sometimes we don't. Some guys are going to be kind of out of whack a little bit, being asked to do things that maybe they haven't been asked to do before. It's going to be a transition time, is what I'm saying. It's like they may end up knocking it out of the park and being really good, and we could win 10 games this year, and and be the 7th seed or 6th seed in the playoffs. I could see that happening. Or we could completely fall apart, and it gets really frustrating after a while, because the players are frustrated, everyone's kind of frustrated, the team kind of goes back and forth a little bit, and we end up winning 5-6 games. And I could see that happening too. I don't think that's going to happen. I would err on the side of we're going to be pretty good, but
I think Seattle's going to be okay.
I don't know.
Some of the stuff will work, some of the stuff won't work. That's kind of the nature of it. It's just like some draft picks hit, some draft picks won't. And in the end, they're going to be all right. They've got a reasonable amount of talent, especially on offense,
they do have a floor
positions
that is fairly high on offense anyway.
And I think that you have a coaching staff now that isn't going to be trying to make a guy like Jerron Reed, an undersized, penetrating defensive tackle, be a 2-gap nose tackle, right?
So Uchenna Nwasu was in his press conference was kind of speaking to that when he said, we've got the right coaching staff in now. We've got the right staff. We've got the right coaches. Mm-hmm. And I think what he was saying is he wasn't dishing Pete Carroll necessarily.
No,
he was excited of what he had to work with now.
And I think it was a little bit. I think there was a lot of frustration with Clint Hurt.
I agree. I think it was directed towards Clint Hurt. Honest.
Yeah. Well, it was more directed towards Mike McDonald, in my opinion. It wasn't meant to be a slap in the face of, the old staff so much as it is.
Agreed.
These guys are going to
get the best out of us.
They're going to do what we do well. And which of course it implies the other group didn't, but,
I don't know. I read it as being very exciting. Like I didn't read that as him, stepping out of line or whatever. I read that as like, that's exactly what you want to say as a player that's excited about coming into a new scheme and a new system and being a guy. You're the guy. Like he's one of the best players on the defense, and he knows it.
This system is it's going to be good for Uchenna Nwasu. It's going to be good for Boye Mafe. Like these are guys that you're going to see do a lot of really good things because it's going to be built around them and what the things that they do.
I just want, I want the whole system to be learned and implemented by, the day after the draft, so that these guys can play fast. So, how draft picks come into a new system and you kind of have to learn, and you're slow to react and you hesitate a little bit and so forth. I see that happening to the entire team now because they're not quite sure, and so that's going to take a little bit of time.
That happens to 8 teams every year.
True.
Right? Because new coaching staffs.
And those 8 teams are usually bad.
Well, those 8 teams are usually awful, but they're also awful on a talent standpoint. So you don't even notice.
Right.
Of all the openings, Seattle was the closest one to playoff caliber. And I mean, they were a 7-win team versus everyone else, which was 5 or less. So their team, we might notice the mistakes and that kind of stuff because there will be higher expectations for Seattle than, say, Washington.
All right. Anything else you want to cover?
No, I think we're good. Let's get out of here.
Let's get out of here. All right. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. You can find us on our favorite podcast platforms and our own YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button when you do. And until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football.